Welcome to another episode of Mindful City, Tuning into Life, a podcast to discover and celebrate the many ways that our city is using mindfulness in our practical daily lives. Welcome to another episode of Mindful City, Tuning into Life. And today we have as our guest Denise O'Dunn from Balance and Bliss Ayurveda in Tampa, Florida. I actually met Denise not only through Balance and Bliss Ayurveda, but also I met Denise through the Ayurveda Counselor Program at the Florida Academy of Ayurveda. And Denise, to me, is just an amazing person. I can't convey it. But the reason I just absolutely had to share the information of Ayurveda and what I've been learning in the program, I just think, how come nobody knows about this? How come this information isn't out there? And just, I'm only halfway through the program, and I just think of how much Ayurveda has already changed my life. And you have such a beautiful way of sharing Ayurveda with all of us and the students. And I just really wanted to have you on the show to share Ayurveda with the public. So I would like to welcome you to the podcast, and thank you for coming. But I also wanted to give you a moment to introduce yourself and who you are and Balance and Bliss and how this came into fruition.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Helen, for asking me to do this. And it's my pleasure and such an honor to sit here with you this way. So my Vedic journey, I'll put it that way, began with an introduction to Hatha Yoga. And I was 13 years old, and it was right here in Tampa, Webb Junior High. It was being offered there through adult continuing education, nighttime class. I always give my mother credit for my whole yogic path because I wasn't old enough to drive, and she would drive me to these evening classes. So it was love at first experience. And I'm dating myself here, and that's fine. In 1969, it was not unusual, to have a yoga class in a public school, not through the system, but again, evening class that in what was maybe a social studies class in the daytime became almost an ashram in the evening. Isn't that there were candles and low light and incense and chanting and all of this
that would happen.
And I loved everything about it. So that actually began my journey that leads me to today. I could not find enough to read at that time. There wasn't as much, in the late 60s. As I went on through my education in high school and into life, I would take every class I could find. It wasn't until the early 80s that I had a teacher that I was studying with who was moving, and she asked if I would consider teaching yoga. And I never thought about teaching yoga. I just loved practicing.
Yes.
But she saw something in me, and I'm forever grateful, and worked with her intensively before she moved for about 6 weeks, and still didn't think I was, ready to teach yoga, but I appreciated the time that I had with her in that way. And back then, we really didn't have the yoga teacher trainings, like we do today.
Right. Yes.
So I had a local Parks and Recreation that found out that I could teach possibly, and they asked me, and that was my first. That was the first yoga class I taught, and time went on. And then through my yoga practice and through my yoga teaching, you can't not find Ayurveda as a sister science, right? Mm-hmm. And in that study and that self-application, even as I went on and had children, and it was used in the household, let's say.
Okay.
But it was in my later 40s, mid to late 40s, that I had more of a business view. And I will say that ultimately this all comes around to the same thing. It was a spiritual path, but I was looking at it from a very business perspective and thought, well, as I go into my years and elderly years, I plan on, I hope to always be on the mat teaching Hatha Yoga. But the what ifs, physical body, it has its way. So I decided I would take the professional study of Ayurveda up for an adjunct to my
yoga
teaching and to my practice. So again, it was just so funny that I looked at it from such a business perspective, but that was what motivated me to do that.
Sometimes you need that because otherwise you wouldn't have that motivation to do it because there's not that drive.
I couldn't put
but
it practical.
You always kind of wonder where the thought comes from, and in maybe whatever form, but whatever you needed at the time
to get you to move forward,
gets you going.
You're so right, Helen. That's right. So in my very first class of Ayurveda professional study, it was a light bulb, however you describe those things, where I thought, I've gone all this time with yoga and it was a complete system in all of the levels of our being that it benefits. But I could see, my eyes were wide open to how Ayurveda coming in along with yoga was truly the complete system. You can practice yoga a whole lifetime and not even know Ayurveda. You could practice Ayurveda and not really know very much about yoga. But boy, when you put them together, it is perfection. And so I fell in love with Ayurveda. I thought it would be an adjunct to what I did in my professional life, but it actually has become the forefront and the focus of my work and my life.
Was there a particular aspect of Ayurveda that just really, touched you? I know overall it's amazing, but was there something in particular about it that just completely made sense to you? And you're like, oh my goodness.
Yes, in fact, the simplicity of it. Now, as a student in professional study, as you know, there's depths to this study. But for a layperson, for the individual that wants to apply it, it's just so simple. And it makes so much sense. It's a simple science. It truly is. If this action creates this reaction. And then if you have this reaction, you can do this action to help keep it balanced. And so it was just this beautiful, simple, straightforward system, which my logical mind appreciated. But then it also had so much beauty to it. It's such a sensory practice. The way that we look at ourselves, obviously, the way we experience being human is through our senses. And then Ayurveda supports that and says that make sure that your foods, are a joy to look at and to savor the taste and the aroma, so it promotes so much beauty through sensory awareness. So that combination of very practical and very sensory.
If anyone were to walk up to you today and say, I see your sign says Balance and Bliss Ayurveda, what is Ayurveda? Really, because it's such a beautiful and magnificent but huge, really, at least in my experience, obviously. But how would you explain that to someone who has never heard of it before?
And I certainly do that. I have that question come to me, not infrequently. So I've never come up with a sentence that can do justice.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't even know quite the elevator answer. How much did you tell them on an elevator ride? But I do try to shorten it. But I do try to shorten it in case I don't have a lot of time with someone. And it is to say that it is a system that promotes awareness of nature. Everything from you as a natural being to the rhythms we all encounter in nature. And the more you understand yourself, which the system of Ayurveda provides, the better choices you make about the way you interact with nature and with all of the decisions you make in the course of the day.
Okay.
I could also take the route, it was the original medicine of India, although it is truly a universal medicine, but coming to us through India. And it is a practice, a science of longevity, of prevention. The more, again, we understand how to make balancing decisions, we're working more preventatively, but it is absolutely fixative too. It meets the person wherever they are in their doshic, which that might be something you want to ask about, but doshic balance or imbalance, and how that can lead to disorder or disease. So it has it definitely is a science as well as it is a personal care system.
And that's actually the aspect that touched me so much and sparked the interest for me to learn about Ayurveda, is because in the world these days, there are so many, and it's actually a wonderful thing. I don't actually think it's a bad thing that there's so much available for everybody in terms of your health and your wellness. And whatever you need, it's there. But one of the things that I find is that not everything works for everybody and not in the same way. And so it's interesting that we're in a time when everything is at our disposal. It's available for us. If you want to be healthy, it's available. But yet, we're not all healthy. We're not all getting to that. And what you're teaching in Ayurveda is that balance is not per se the same for everyone. So could you explain a little bit what balance means in Ayurveda and why it's so different, and that whatever route that we choose in terms of health will be different depending on the person?
Absolutely, and it's such an important question. Ayurveda gives us, a system to understand ourselves as individuals. It is based on the principles of 5 primary elements of ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And in that understanding of everything manifested from these 5 elements, we also as individuals have a certain amount of these elements, dominant to least amount. They further classify it into the doshas, these essential forces of nature. Vata, made up of ether and air, Pitta, made up of fire and water, and Kapha, made up of water and earth. And we were provided our original combination of how much Vata, how much Pitta, how much Kapha, meaning that we had a certain amount of elements accordingly. And those elements can further be divided into certain qualities. So we all have certain qualities. We all have a certain amount of that part of us that's hot or cold, or light or heavy, and so on. With that said, with that fundamental understanding, then we say we were born with this perfect combination of dosha for our purpose, our reason for being here. A person might say for their dharma. And in that respect, it is designed for you to do what you're here to do. It doesn't mean that every moment is going to be harmonious, because every dosha, every element and quality has its strengths and weaknesses. So you're constantly experiencing the nature of your own dominance, right? But because we are influenced by these doshas, these elements and these qualities all day long, then we are able to make decisions based on us as individuals. So I love teaching my clients that I see one-on-one, and then my students of professional, training of Ayurveda, that there are a lot of good systems and there are a lot of good modalities, and they all have their place. Everything has its place. But Ayurveda is the only system I know of that takes you as an absolute individual. Herbology, for an example. When we look at herbs and their properties, that tells you a lot about the herbs and why you would want to use certain herbs for certain, disorders or conditions. But if you don't know you as an individual, you'll respond differently because of the elements of the herbs and the elements you hold. And are they going to put you in excess of those elements? So the same person that needs a property, let's say, of a decongestant, they might need a decongestant that is more liquefying. They might need a decongestant that's more drying.
Right.
And so we are just absolutely unique individuals, and that's why everything from the food we eat to the decisions we make about relationships, it cannot be a one-fits-all system.
Yeah, and that's what attracted me to learning to understand, and really it's I wanted to learn about me. I wanted to understand how I function, and so that I can properly be balanced myself as I go throughout life. How do you determine what someone's original, mix of those elements are, as you were sharing with us earlier? What's the process of determining that?
So when we have certainly there, you'll find questionnaires online and in magazines and books and such, and those are good, and sometimes they can be rather valid, but they're only going to tell you where you are currently. Right. Unless you're being directed in some other way. You would naturally answer a question like it is now.
Right now.
So that's one aspect of your dosha combination. We call it Vakriti, or your current state, through pulse technique that we do, just like taking your pulse for pulse rate, but we're finding information on different levels of depth into the pulse point, and that is just one aspect. The other are visual observations. There's information that we get from the tongue and from the eyes, from the nail and the hair and the skin, and then lengthy questioning, about physical structures, features, physiology, mind, and emotions as a child, to gather information about your original nature and then currently. And that is what we put together to determine the appropriate recommendations for a person.
So once you've gone through that process, what are the options that are available that you can be? So if I find my balance, because you were mentioning that we all have different amounts of the elements. So how many opportunities of difference are there for all of us?
I love that question, because it might seem like this is kind of pigeonholing, like we have this possibility, but actually it's limitless. Yes. However, we do have what we call 10 basic qualifications or possibilities. One is that you're a single dosha type. Now, everybody has all 5 elements, all 3 doshas represented in their system.
Yes. Okay.
They have to. But they're going to have more of one, secondary somewhere, and a third that's noticeably less. A person that is what we call single dosha still has the other 2, but they're much less, and they would be called a vata type, a pitta type, or a kapha type. But then there's dual dosha, and that's actually much more common. Nature always sees that there's a better plan if you have a dominant and an assistant right behind it. So then people are dual doshas. They could be pitta vata, vata pitta. It could be pitta kapha, kapha pitta. They could be vata kapha, kapha vata. It might be sounding like I'm speaking a different language right now. Or they could be tridoshic, vata pitta kapha, or in some order, even of slight dominance between them. That's quite rare. That doesn't happen often in nature. So those are the 10 basic types. However, I'm pitta vata dominant by nature. And yet I have a certain amount of fire and water based on my pitta nature, a certain amount of ether and air based on my vata nature. So if I have more water than another pitta vata type that has more fire, we're different.
Yes.
The way
so even within
things.
that, there's still, depending on how much of each and what type.
Yes.
That makes it. That's very beautiful. So it's still, you're very unique.
Yes. And let me tell you beyond that, and this is me getting excited like I do. So you have your doshic dominance, and then you have your elemental dominance, but then you also have your quality dominance. So let's say a person that is vata dominant, maybe their highest quality is air, but so vata dominant, their highest element is air, but their highest quality could be dry or it could be cold. And so the choices they need to make would be different than another one that was that was the opposite.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So what it does is it makes us absolute unique individuals. There's not another person on this planet ever has been the same.
And that's what I find so truly beautiful. And I remember having a moment when I had my consultation with you, and after taking that information back and looking to understand myself and really sit with that and to see how I felt about that information. And I found myself emotional. And it was an emotional because I felt understood. I felt for the first time to see it, how you had it drawn and how you had it divided. And it was a sense that it made sense for me that all this time, everything that everyone else was doing or telling me to do to be better or healthy was always kind of having not the effect that it was supposed to have. So what do you see when someone has this information in a way that it describes them in such a way? How do you see them using that information and moving forward? How do you see them moving into their life, and how does it affect or aspect the different parts of their lives?
Mm-hmm. Well, Ayurveda uses everything that nature has provided and our normal rhythms that we have in a day. Everything has a dosha quality, elemental quality to it. So we make recommendations for personal balance in food choices, foods that will increase or decrease your dosha dominance, or even your current quality. Then we also have recommendations of herbs. It's certainly part of our practice, recommendations of certain oils to use, daily routines. We even focus on times of day that have doshic dominance during the day and why we might choose to do something a certain time of day that would work better for us than against us. And then everything else. I mean, if a person is practicing yoga, there's actually a way to consider practicing that will increase or decrease the doshas accordingly.
Yeah.
There are different breathing techniques that we use specifically to help to manage dosha. There's even types of mantra and repetitions of sounds, or even the way we meditate.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that you do in a day, even the type of work you do, again, to the relationships you're in, have an effect on you. And that effect has a quality. That means that quality is related to a dosha. So we as professionals in Ayurveda, we make recommendations across the board for everything that a person has to make decisions about, and just show them which options will keep them in balance or help them regain that balance.
That's really beautiful, because I do think, and that's one of the things that I feel you do so beautifully, is that you're educating people about themselves and giving them the tools to be able to do that. Because I wish you were there with me every day. Denise, can you check my pulse today? But you're teaching, and you're teaching your clients, you're teaching your students how to notice that within themselves so that they can adjust accordingly. So it's almost like you're getting a toolbox, and you just didn't know which tools to take out. And then you can you feel almost partnering into moving towards your health. So what is the name of perfect health in
Svasta?
Svasta.
Yes.
So that means everything is working.
Doshas
balance.
are balanced, energy is balanced, that there is not excess of the gunas. It's another talk, another time, but that we are also, that the channels are clear, that there is not excess residues in the body. It has a list of requirements to be considered in perfect health, but it is obtainable.
It's something to begin to move forward to.
Absolutely.
And you are just an amazing person to meet, to have when I'm evaluating myself, when I'm learning about myself. And so I really do appreciate having had an opportunity to have a consultation with you, and now an opportunity to speak with you about, and I was actually, before we started the podcast, I wanted you all to know that I was very excited about this podcast interview with Denise, because I do have a wonderful opportunity to have Denise as a teacher, as an educator, and to spend a whole weekend with her and the other students. And I was really curious, because I feel having this one-on-one time with you, I would just really see from this personal and just this radiating of your love for Ayurveda. And I totally got to see that. And so I wanted to thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. And I really do hope that I get to have you on the podcast again in the future to talk more about the beauty of Ayurveda and how it can be an amazing tool.
I would love that. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you so much.
Namaste.
To determine your original body-mind constitution, dosha, to learn more about Ayurveda or Denise, visit balanceandbliss.com or find Balance and Bliss on social media.